But in 1987, Stephanie Fox is a healthy college student when she comes down with something that seems like a typical bug.
Stephanie came home from college one Thanksgiving. She didn't feel well. She had a cold.
I got extremely ill, very high fever. I just was having trouble even getting out of bed.
She just looked very pale and a little bit on the frail side.
And I got better maybe a week later, went back to school. I thought it was just the flu. I didn't think it was anything significant.
At school, Stephanie starts dating Josh Kaplan, and soon Josh can't help but notice that Stephanie doesn't seem quite right.
There were moments when I was first getting to know her where she would just sort of lose energy. It would come out of the blue. She would be running around doing something, going to classes, and then the next thing I knew, Stephanie would be not feeling well.
Just thought that I was prone to getting ill. It didn't really dawn on me that there was anything significantly wrong.
But a few months later, she begins to experience symptoms more alarming than fatigue with the flu.
I started getting feet and leg cramps very often.
You could just watch her feet tense and her toes stand up and being rigid.
Worried for the first time, Stephanie goes to see the on-campus doctors, but they can't find anything wrong with her.
I don't think at that time anybody thought it was unusual. You know, a typical college student wasn't getting enough sleep, was studying, and just immune system was down.
The fatigue, frequent illness, and muscle cramping continue on and off. Following the doctor's lead, Stephanie tries not to worry. But then she notices another strange problem.
In 1988, really at the beginning of the year, I started to lose my sex drive and my libido. And it became a very significant part of our relationship because I couldn't explain why I had no sexual desire at all.
I didn't really know what to make of it. Totally confused, very frustrated in every definition of that word.
Despite this, Josh and Stephanie are in love and make plans to get married right after graduation. But Stephanie is tortured by her non-existent libido and wants to clear it up before the wedding, so she makes an appointment with a gynecologist.
I told her that I had lost my sex drive completely and was very baffled by it.
That doctor said it's pre-wedding jitters, you need to just get over it.
I figured she's a doctor, she knows what she's talking about, and maybe I'm just nervous, and everything will go back to normal after the wedding.
But it doesn't. In fact, everything, the colds, the fatigue, the cramping, is all getting worse. Then Josh notices a new bizarre development.
She seemed to be putting on weight. Her stomach around her midsection got large and not normal. It's just weird.
I couldn't believe it. She looked like she was 4 months pregnant or 6 months pregnant. She was just huge.
But Stephanie doesn't see it.
When you see yourself in the mirror every day and you're gaining some weight, it really, believe it or not, didn't set any alarms off in my head that something was wrong.
A new symptom, though, does grab Stephanie's attention.
I stopped menstruating really in the fall of 1989. I knew at that point that something was wrong.
Alarmed, Stephanie heads back to the doctors.
I went to see many different doctors to try to figure out why did my period stop, why was my libido the way that it was, why were my legs cramping.
She was seeing her general practitioner.
I went to a neurologist.
She was seeing her gynecologist.
I went to many internal medicine doctors.
After weeks of testing and examinations, no one can find anything wrong.
I was told by one that it was all in my head. You start to doubt yourself after a while. My gosh, maybe I am a hypochondriac. Maybe there really isn't anything significantly wrong.
But then, in January of 1990, something else develops. Something very weird.
I started to have yellow skin.
Well, it was just a yellowish tint to her.
My eyes were yellow.
Not really dark, but just that they weren't her normal color.
It wasn't something that threw a red flag, because when you see someone every day, you don't necessarily recognize that something's wrong with them.
Finally, though, Josh has had enough of Stephanie's laid-back attitude.
And then there was one morning when she was on the phone with her doctor, and I kept nagging at her. I kept saying, "Tell the doctor your eyes are yellow." And she kept pushing me away. "Tell the doctor your eyes are yellow," pushing me away. And finally she said, Josh wants me to tell you my eyes are yellow.
And that's when the doctor said, I need to see you in the hospital, and I'll meet you there in 10 minutes.
Muscle cramps, flu and fatigue, lack of sex drive. For the past 3 years, Stephanie Kaplan has been suffering from vague symptoms that don't seem all that dangerous. But in early 1990, when her skin and eyes take on a yellow hue, her doctor tells her to get to the hospital immediately.
We literally picked up, went to the hospital, and they started running tests.
I don't think I was scared. I think adrenaline started to kick in a little bit to say, let's figure out what's wrong and get me out of there as soon as possible.
But Stephanie must be admitted for observation until her tests come back. And when they do, they're shocking.
I was diagnosed with autoimmune hepatitis.
Autoimmune hepatitis is a chronic disease where the immune system attacks the liver. The liver is the body's detoxifier. When it isn't working right, toxins can build up, tinting the skin and eyes.
And that's why I turned yellow, because my body was poisoning itself because my liver wasn't working.
The doctor tells Stephanie that autoimmune hepatitis can be treated with drugs that suppress the immune system. But then he raises another concern. Stephanie's bloated stomach suggests to him that she may have another chronic autoimmune condition, Crohn's disease. With Crohn's, the immune system attacks the intestines, leading to a host of potential complications. He discharges her and recommends that she see a gastroenterologist.
My mom was completely panicked because she had watched her mother die of Crohn's disease.
And I became the mother lion, so to speak. And I said to my husband, I'm calling the Crohn's Association to find out what doctors are available.
My mom got a referral to one of the best Crohn's specialists in Los Angeles, who was Dr. Edward Feldman at Cedars-Sinai.
Stephanie was very ill. That was clear from the moment she came in.
Dr. Feldman orders x-rays and blood work to confirm the Crohn's diagnosis so he can start treatment right away. But when the tests come back, he is shocked.
By looking at her x-rays, there was no good evidence that she had Crohn's disease. But on the other hand, the blood test results were quite striking.
The blood tests show Stephanie has elevated liver enzymes, an indication that her liver has deteriorated.
Her liver was clearly failing. Could she have lived a few more days, a few more weeks? Probably. A few more months? Unlikely.
Knowing other diseases can mimic autoimmune hepatitis, Stephanie's earlier diagnosis, Dr. Feldman calls Dr. John Vierling, an expert in liver disorders.
Stephanie's level of liver dysfunction was so severe that if we were not able to establish a diagnosis, immediately her only option was going to be liver transplantation.
Stephanie is admitted to the hospital immediately, and her family rushes to her side.
Stephanie looked like death. She was gray. She was weak, extremely weak. She didn't look like she was going to make it.
They were doing different scans. They had her in and out of the room. It seemed like it was just a never-ending series of tests.
She was in terrible pain, and that was really the first time I'd ever really seen her in just really excruciating pain.
Her body had just stopped functioning, and she didn't have much time.
Dr. Vierling knows he must get answers fast. But first, he needs to get a closer look at the liver tissue, so he orders an immediate liver biopsy.
I was a little bit nervous going in for the biopsy.
A liver biopsy is normally a routine procedure done directly through the skin into the liver. But the liver dysfunction has caused Stephanie's blood to stop clotting. Doctors know the standard method could lead to massive internal bleeding, and they can't risk it.
Our only alternative was to puncture the jugular vein in the neck and to thread a catheter down past the heart to the interior of the liver to obtain a biopsy.
I just remember holding Josh's hand as I was being rolled down to the operating room and just looking into his eyes and saying, I love you, and hoping that that wasn't the last time that I would be able to tell him that.
As the biopsy equipment was being threaded toward its target, it actually collapsed the right lung.
Doctors work quickly to stabilize Stephanie, but the biopsy is aborted before they can get a specimen.
This was a very significant setback in what was already a very sick young woman.
For the past 3 years, Stephanie Kaplan has been suffering from mysterious symptoms. Now she is in the hospital with severe liver failure, and doctors are racing against the clock to uncover the exact cause.
She was slipping into liver failure, which leads to coma, which leads to death.
But with a biopsy now out of the question, Vierling and Feldman head back to the drawing board to find a way to diagnose Stephanie's problem before it's too late.
I ordered 3 tests. The first was a ceruloplasmin, which is measuring the amount of a protein in the blood. One was a 24-hour urine collection. The other test was to ask an ophthalmologist to look in the clear portion of the eye called the cornea.
With liver disease, symptoms will sometimes manifest in the eyes. Dr. Vierling hopes Stephanie's eyes may offer some clue as to what's killing her.
The ophthalmologist found that I had copper rings in my eyes.
And when the results from the other 2 tests come back, they tell the same story.
The blood work showed that I had excess copper in my system.
Putting all the pieces of this puzzle together, it added up that she had excessive amounts of copper, and it was accumulating in her liver and causing her to be very ill.
I believe strongly that the diagnosis was Wilson's disease.
Wilson's disease is a rare genetic disorder where the liver can't rid itself of copper, a mineral found in many foods we eat. Eventually, the copper gets into the bloodstream, accumulates in various organs, including the brain, corneas, and kidneys, and interferes with organ function. If it's not diagnosed and treated, Wilson's disease is fatal.
So this copper accumulates and causes damage by replacing normal tissue.
Copper accumulation can also cause damage to the nervous system, leading to muscle cramping, and can alter hormone levels.
The fact that the liver was not functioning normal is undoubtedly the explanation for why she suffered loss of libido, ultimately stopped menstruating.
There is no cure for Wilson's disease, but it can be managed with medications. Doctors immediately begin Stephanie on treatment.
We used a drug that binds with copper and takes it out of the body through the urine.
Within hours, Stephanie sees what has been poisoning her for years.
Copper basically started pouring out of my body.
And Stephanie also finds out why it took so long for doctors to solve the mystery.
Well, Stephanie's experience was actually fairly typical for patients with Wilson's disease, where often the earliest signs of symptoms are not really recognized as being due to this disease.
After Stephanie started taking the medicine that they had prescribed, things started getting better pretty quickly. Within several months, her life started returning to normal.
And it was so wonderful to see the Stephanie that I knew come back.
Today, a daily dose of medication is Stephanie's only reminder of how close she came to dying.
Stephanie's doing great today. As long as Stephanie stays on her medication, she's going to be wonderful.
After this diagnosis, we were able to really put our marriage, our sex life, and everything else on a track of where we wanted to go.
Our life together now is absolutely 100% normal.
I think that I will have a bond with these doctors for the rest of my life because I credit them with saving my life.
Stephanie Kaplan's illness started when she was in college.